Hey guys, it's Dr. Devin. I'm super excited, actually on the edge of my seat as we speak, because I get to bring you today a conversation that I shared with one of my friends, mentors, one of my heroes, a shero, a wild-hearted warrior woman who has inspired me as a woman, as a mother, as a healthcare practitioner, and as an advocate for truth. Dr. Jen Barham-Floreani is from Melbourne, Australia, and she's been through a lot this year. And she's in this episode, she opens up her heart and she talks about this crisis that we are experiencing right now, a crisis where we have a lack of hope, a lack of trust. She says it's time for a revolution. She says it's time to evolve, and I could not agree more. Her words of wisdom, her words of light and truth and love, guys, they lifted me up in so many ways. Please buckle up and join Dr. Jen and I for this episode of If They Knew. Hello, everybody. It's Dr. Devin. I have been giddy excited for this episode of If They Knew for well over a week now. I have invited a sister of mine from across the seas, down under in Australia, and she is one of my heroes, one of my mentors, one of the lighthouses that I look to in this chaotic storm that is 2020. And her wisdom, her grace, and her strength, I am sure will inspire you as they have me. I want to welcome Dr. Jennifer Barham-Floreani, all the way from Australia. Hello.
Hello, gorgeous. Thank you for having me. And I know my name is...
I've got goosebumps. I mean, I will never forget hearing you speak for the first time when I was in chiropractic school and reading Well-Adjusted Babies. I mean, it's not an understatement when I say you have changed my life.
No, thank you. Thank you. That means a lot. That's because, you as well are just such a steward of truth and a lighthouse for so many people over there in the US. So, I listen to you and you stir my heart so many times. So it's lovely to be here and be with your tribe.
Yes. And I invited her with the concept of if they knew. I am sure you've been in many spaces and places like I have, where we hear the quote, if they knew what we knew, they would do what we do. And when we see so much turbulence out in the world, maybe picking one thing feels hard. But if you could open your heart, because your experience, I'm sure, is very different. It feels, at least from a distance in watching the things that you've gone through there in Australia, if you could just for a second speak to the temperament of the climate down there, and what's that thing that you wish more people, more of humanity knew and understood that would help us heal as we evolve through it?
Yeah. Look, Devin, I mean, I'm sure we'll get to what's unfolded for me in particular this year. And you and I were just touching on it. I think it's similar for a lot of people. It's been this whole precipice of growth. And we sort of feel like we've been crashing into the guardrails and having to examine our beliefs about things and, pose those important questions of, well, why do I think like that? Where did that come from? And I think it's been a year where for a lot of us, our belief systems have crumbled because the authority that we've given to governments and to the media and to science and religion and all of these constructs and models have come into question more than ever this year. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's been coming the last 5-10 years for a lot of us. We've been if we've been in the health industry, we've been looking at it for a long time. But I think from a parent perspective, the dots haven't added up for the last 5 years or so. People have had more and more questions, and this year has just really been, that tipping point for most people where they have to draw a line in the sand. Mm-hmm. And they have to really be discerning and to decide what it is that they believe and why. And that comes from examining their beliefs. And so if I think about Melbourne, Australia, we've had months of crazy lockdowns and, from earlier in the year. And it sort of just was magnified so quickly where we went straight into lockdown. And we were quarantining everyone, healthy people, which I know worldwide has not made sense for a lot of us. When do we ever quarantine healthy people,
Right.
Mm-hmm. And so we went into lockdown and quarantine. We all had to then wear masks outside everywhere we went. And, the social distancing and all those things I know you guys are experiencing. And yet, what kept coming up for me is, if we're going to use these mandates and these directives, surely the onus is on the government to produce the science as to how that will be effective. When they are, creating such trauma for people, where they've had to close their businesses, where they've had to compromise their livelihood for weeks, for months, shut down businesses, sell homes, and that financial strain on top of then, having to try and work from home if they've got kids, that emotional kind of, strain as well. And so in our practice, we saw so many people who this year feel like the wheels have been falling off some weeks, and then they recalibrate. And, part of our role has been to help them overcome that stress and move through that, and to then just work out, how do they navigate their way forward. So it's been an interesting time. And now in Melbourne, Devon, we are perhaps potentially coming out the other side. Who knows, with everything that's going on, right. With those who seem to be higher up the food chain, who seem to be controlling everything. But at the moment, we don't have to wear masks outside as long as we social distance, but we still do indoors. And so, Melbournians, because we've been so fiercely locked down, all of a sudden this minuscule freedom feels like it's fantastic. And really the reality is it's not a mask issue. It's not, the social distancing or the quarantine. It's the overall picture. And we very quickly let those health freedoms go. So, it's
very quickly. How would you say, when I go to a store, contrary really to what I feel like media portrays, they say there's these anti-mask rebels and there's these people who just will not comply. And yet, I've traveled to Atlanta and Phoenix recently. And when I go to the store here locally, I see 99% compliance. I feel like people have really, to my surprise, handed over, and complied at every turn. Yet the media still, I guess, portrays it as if there's this, rise up that I certainly don't see and feel when I go out. How has it been down there as far as people going along with these mandates? Have you felt much resistance?
It's interesting. I think if we step back, I'm surprised of what's evolved this year. People who I thought would potentially go along with these directives wholeheartedly, because that was the good citizen, the good thing to do. The whole virtual signaling with the masks, all of those things. But when questions have come up about this fast-tracked vaccine, and we've seen Trump and other politicians just plant seeds that have questioned the ingredients with vaccines, all of a sudden, as you've probably experienced, all of a sudden more people are starting to look at that whole box that they thought that they'd sealed up and had decided that anti-vaxxers were uneducated and just rat bags and, uninformed. Right. And now they've had to reopen that and look at it and ask questions like, why do they put aborted fetal tissue into vaccines? What does it mean that these vaccines may impact my DNA or my child's DNA? And so, on this whole spectrum, I've had people who I thought were very fixed in their health beliefs do a 360. And I've had wonderful wholehearted conversations with them, and they have joined me on the front lines in so many things. And then, like you said, I'll go into some of the towns around us and I'll just see people driving in their cars with their masks on. And even this week, since the directive has been dropped about masks not being needed outside, people are still wearing them.
Yeah.
And as you said, you know, media have done an amazing job in creating that fear. And people have adopted that without critically thinking and have just decided that masks are the virtuous thing to do to protect society without ever looking at it. And, you know, then they may engage on social media in an argument saying, oh, well, that can't be true. You know, I would like to see more research on that. Or I'm not sure I believe that expert. And it goes back to the same argument of, you know, oh, I want research, but not that research. I want experts to come forward, but not those experts. And so I think for a lot of people, they're still really grappling with how much is enough for them to pause and consider how they've been conditioned. And we've had it for decades. We've literally been conditioned for decades to hand over, you know, our authority for our health, for, you know, our education, for so many different things. And it's, you know, there's those perverse incentives there. So
you see the entanglements between media and school and fact-checking, censorship, and the government and healthcare and insurance and all of it. And it does, you know, you talked about the belief systems crumbling. It's an interesting time to, I mean, because this isn't a new topic. You touched on that as well. It's like we're not new to this conversation. It just hasn't been amplified to this effect. So when you zoom out and you see the entanglements and you see the crumbling, what do you wish more people knew, or how do they tap into the critical thinking, or where do they go for truth? What could we empower them with as it crumbles, as it shifts, as everything we've known transforms?
Yeah. And I think that, you know, our education and our background, Devon, is so uniquely placed at this time. And it is such a gift, because I think the greatest crisis we have right now is a lack of hope. It really is. You know, people think that we won't overcome this virus unless we wear a mask. We won't overcome this virus unless we stay in our homes. We'll never go back to normal unless we get a vaccine. And it feels like all hope is gone unless we have that outside approach. And it's like what I said before, you know, we've handed over our health to GPs and physicians and, you know, medical specialists every time. And it's like we put it on a platter and say, fix it and give it back to me when you're done, you know. And so as far as chiropractic and natural medicine, because we have an understanding in how the body functions, you know, and some of those basic principles of chiropractic, of there's an intelligence in the universe, you know, that grows an oak tree from the acorn and an embryo into a baby and all of those things, there's that intelligence within us, and that governs every cell, every organ, every function in the body. And, you know, you would talk about this a lot, I'm sure, on these podcasts, and it enables us, that innate intelligence enables us to overcome a virus, to recreate order, to overcome sickness and disease. And so I think the greatest crisis is the lack of hope. And the more that natural healthcare practitioners, that chiropractors can empower people on where to learn about that, how to be empowered about the innate intelligence of the body, how to strengthen their health, that's where freedom comes from. And, you know, the other tragedy I think this year is really the lack of truth. And so if we can just, you know, again, step back and look at potentially what's happened over the last 150 years easily within healthcare. And you and I are aware of this, but a lot of people aren't. Right. And so what seems logical today is because of a very strategic plan that was set out a long time ago. And so there's certain names and families that have come up this year. And so the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, a lot of these people who we know are incredibly wealthy, and they often have financial gain with what decisions are being made right now. But Devon, what I want to get across here just briefly is that these same families had a strategy in and around 1850, where they decided that they would create a report. They hired a PhD guy who was primarily a philosopher, but they got him to examine and look at all the different medical schools and what they were being taught, having a look at the universities that were teaching homeopathy and chiropractic and natural medicine and herbal medicine and all of those things. And they constructed a report that basically completely discredited natural medicine, and it changed the route of medical training. And only certain universities that were teaching medicine were then approved, because they were all leading those medical students towards being able to prescribe drugs, because those same families, had the stronghold over big pharma and drug manufacturing. And so other medical universities that didn't alter their course were quickly discredited and shut down. And so from about the 1850s, we've had this Flexner report, which you and I know has drastically changed the way that people view natural medicine. And the playing field has changed. Whereas there was a time where people were able to seek out different practitioners. They were all incredibly effective because these therapists had different skill sets. Whereas the playing ground, changed. And all of a sudden there was so much money pumped into mainstream medicine and allopathic medicine, which is all about sickness and disease. And it was put on this pedestal. And every other form of natural healthcare was discredited to our disadvantage. Because if you can have a vitalistic approach, a natural, drug-free, holistic approach to so many health challenges as the first port of call, then that's how we serve humanity. That's how we re-nurture their health. But when we always step in first with drugs and surgery, then this is where we are, as a society. We take more drugs than ever before. We have more surgery and intervention, and we're sicker than ever. And for the parents listening, our children are so compromised. Most children, 54% of them have some form of chronic disease.
54%. I mean, full goosebumps as we say it. I've got 5 kids. You have 4.
Yeah.
And grandchildren are, I'm sure, in our futures. We understand that the decisions that we make and have made will impact generations. Absolutely. So this is just where we're at. It's not even how bad it could be if we continue on this trajectory.
Yeah, exactly. And so, it's interesting, I think, for the public to try and put that in perspective, because when they question and think, oh, well, that research can't be right, or those anti-vaxxers are uneducated, or that expert, must just be a rogue, and they shut that down rather than examining their assumptions. And I understand, we've been led with a very strategic strategy by those who financially gain. And so I think it's really important this year, to just sit back and think, whenever you have that gut feeling that something's not right, to ask questions like, well, who's gaining in this situation? Who is financially gaining by these mandates, by these directives? And if you don't know, in that moment, then get busy, start reading, start asking people who inspire you, what do they think? What have they read? What would they suggest? And, that's so incredibly important to preserve our families and our kids' health more than ever right now. And that's just from, everything that's kind of escalating in 2020. Yeah.
Where do you see it going from here?
I think that, I talk about this sometimes in talks as well. When I look at the patterns that have happened throughout history, and, different authors have spoken about it, but there seems to be this habit before every revolution that we've had, where society experiences extreme rigidity for a period of time. And it might be years or it might be a decade. And we start to see an increase in sickness and in violence and, just that whole conflict within a society. And what this pattern has shown us is that from that, different people step up. There are change agents who in every revolution have created this wide sweeping change that society has then evolved. And I think more than ever, even though I get disheartened seeing people driving with masks on their own, I'm also so excited about those other aspects, even online with social media. People more than ever are just speaking the truth in their own way. They don't have to be a me, they don't have to be a you, but they'll comment on a conversation which inspires somebody else to ask deeper questions, bigger questions. And so I think that right now it's incredibly important that everyone just realizes that, if we touch on it quickly, but that whole global reset is not something we want to acknowledge. It's frightening, it's scary, it's all of those things, particularly if you're a parent. Mm-hmm. But in that discomfort, again, comes our freedom. Mm-hmm. And it's like when you have a health crisis with your child. If they've got chronic earaches, if they've got chronic tonsillitis, and all these things that you've tried aren't working, there comes a point in time where you have to sit in that discomfort and think, what is triggering this? Who else do I need to seek out help from? What other questions do I need to be asking? And so, I think, again, we are in a position, Devon, and chiropractic and natural healthcare, because we've been fighting this battle for a long time to really help humanity see that we can overcome this. We can move through it by just standing in our truth, mm-hmm. By doing the research, clarifying what we think, what we believe, and then bravely standing in our truth. And the more of us who do that, who speak up on a small scale or a large scale, it will have that sweeping effect, I believe, on collective consciousness. And, I think more than ever, we are aligned. Mm-hmm. We've got this, as social media, as much as it has all of the downsides, it's quite remarkable at the moment in a way that it's bringing us together.
Well, look at us right now. I mean, I can't curse media and be face to face with you across oceans.
Yeah,
different time zones. I mean, it is a gift. Yeah, it's a gift. Now, I'm going to tag into two things based off one thing that you just said. To the people that want to raise their voice, to the people that know their truth, believe their truth, live their truth, but are scared because of the censorship, because of, it's been made that if we believe a certain way that we lack compassion for people, that it's that, we're not virtuous, that we're not thinking of the whole, should we choose a certain way? What do you say to the people, to the practitioners that want to raise their voice, but they're nervous or they're scared?
Yeah. I think, I always say to my boys, you can say anything if you say it from, a golden heart, if you speak with love. And so if they've got conflict with a teacher or with an adult, then, initially we may have to kind of role play because they're little and they don't quite understand the gravity of words sometimes and tone. But I still believe that right now, if we trust in that, if we're really speaking from our heart, we can have any conversation. And there are some people, who really don't want to discuss anything. So I'm not talking about entering a conversation with those people because you could talk till you're blue in the face. But if you have someone who you genuinely feel is open to discussing it, mm-hmm. then, trust that you will be innately led. And if you open your heart and that you can then have that conversation, and you don't have to have all the answers. You could pause it and say, well, it seems like, we've gotten to this point. Maybe I can look into that further. Maybe you can look up what you were talking about and let's discuss it further. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's really, really important. And to the point of, yes, we are connecting online with social media, but I think more than ever, we really need to be connecting on a local level as well. We need those grassroots level connections and finding people in our area who think like us, who we can lean on, who can, help us create strategies in and around what would we do if this happens, and it may not, but I think it's really important. Sometimes fear is paralyzing, as we know, and it shuts down our voice and it stops us from doing anything. But if we can come up with a strategy of, okay, so this may happen or this may happen, what would we do? Who would we connect with? What would our plan be? And you talk about it and you go, okay, we've thought that through. Now we understand the power of intention. We're just going to let it go because we don't want to dwell on it all the time. It's like when you're planning for a birth. Hope is not a strategy. You still have to plan for the fact that births are unpredictable and things can happen. And so what are, those other things that you need to consider? What's your backup plan? And so I think that once we do that, we move through the fear. And, Devin, if I just give you a bit of a snapshot for me, because I think where we started this conversation is a lot of what's happened for me this year is similar for a lot of people. And so, as you know, I've been a chiro 20 plus years, mum of 4. During that time, I started writing my main book, which is Well-Adjusted Babies. And it just came about because I think I was very blessed as a child to go along to a lot of personal development seminars, and I set a lot of goals. And in that process, you get really clear on what your values are. And so you strive to live this purpose-led life, not a life of significance. And, in the days now of social media, people kind of clutch on to being significant, and it can be very manufactured and artificial and those things. Whereas I think sometimes the greatest reward when we look back on our lives is that distinction, and it's actually a purpose-led life. Yeah. And so that's not always glamorous. There's times where you are heavily scrutinized, it's stressful, and you really have to stand your ground. And so for the last, probably, I think the first edition was about 15 years ago, I put out Well-Adjusted Babies. And the ethos is very like this podcast. It was information that I felt parents needed to know, because as a practitioner, it was research that I was reading. It was information I was, distilling that I wanted initially my patients to know to help preserve their bubbers, and preserve their child's health. And so Well-Adjusted Babies just started having this life of its own as I was raising, babies. And it, Devin, I think it's really when you strive to live by your values and you speak your truth, the universe conspires. And so that book has sold, hundreds of thousands of copies around the world. But I share that because we never had a marketing team. We've never, had PR people. It was just something that evolved, different editions because I was passionate about it. And it had a life of its own. But with that, coming back to a purpose-led life, there's no praise without reprimand. And so while it was having huge support by, influencers and all of those things, in the background, I was having a lot of, legal issues with our regulator. So for the parents listening, all primary healthcare practitioners, which are chiropractors, GPs, ophthalmologists, all of us are regulated by a group of people. And their philosophy is to protect the public from any practitioner who might want to do something inappropriate, touch them inappropriately or do any of that. That's where they're meant to step in.
Right.
And yet what was happening over the last 10 years is they were taking a lot of issue with the content in my book, because I was discussing vaccination and the pros and cons, antibiotics, a lot of those things. So it was ongoing. But my point, Devin, is that this year it got to a point where I had to draw a line in the sand. Because for the last 3 years, I tried to be the good girl. I tried to just shut down all the legal issues, as practitioners, as chiropractors, we were having more and more regulation. We weren't allowed to talk about chiropractic and the benefits of colic, or chiropractic and breech pregnancies, chiropractic and asthma. And we certainly weren't able to talk about, the potential side effects of vaccines that you and I see in practice with, with little children in some circumstances. And so for 3 years, I did nothing on social media. I was just thinking I'll put my head down. My husband had also had some issues. And my point is, sometimes when you buy into the fear and you shut your voice down and you get fearful of the confrontation of, fearful of standing in your truth, it catches up with you. And I actually got sick. And it got to a point where I realized that every cell in my body was telling me that I was no longer serving my maker. I was serving this board who are influenced by other third parties, and I was trying to live up to their standards rather than living to my blueprint of my life, my purpose that my maker gave me. And so I, as it got to the point where I had another legal issue come up, and all based on what I had said on social media about things that were compromising families in 2020. And they wanted to suspend my license. So this is back to the point where they're meant to be protecting the public from,
meaning
people.
You were not in alignment with the narrative that they wanted for people, and not in the good girl role anymore, not staying quiet.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I know I'm not alone in that. There are so many people worldwide who've been incredibly brave, this year, and have come forward and put their reputations on the line. And for me, it was really important to do that. So I handed in my license, and since then I've been incredibly busy, and I'm back in that creative flow. I have new products coming out because I think what I offer to different conversations it's incredibly important, and it needs to be put on the table. And I don't serve anyone by shutting my voice down. And so, my hope in sharing that story is for any of the parents who think, oh, I can't say that to my family, they're all nurses or they're all doctors, or I can't say that in my mother's group. And it's just really important to decide that by avoiding those conversations, by avoiding, doing the research, it can catch up with us anyway. It's that catch-22. If you feel like you're off balance, if you're not living congruently, it catches up with you.
Always. That dis-ease in the system doesn't go away. Very, very similar of if there's a symptom, it will come back, or it will get louder. I can remember being on a Zoom call with you and a few other of our female chiropractors, and feeling that angst of, but what happens if I can't practice? What happened? And those tough decisions that people, we all are in our own individual transformation during a collective transformation. And I know, because I was recently at Life University, and I know because I've sat in circles of women, female chiropractors, that your bravery to make the tough call when the tough call needs made, and not sacrificing your own health, and not containing what feels like it's time, when it's time to push, it's time to push. And so that leadership for all of us, when the tide rises, so do all the ships. And that's what you're doing for us in that leadership. It does a lot of this remind me of the birth process, where it's like, where we're rebirthing ourselves, I think, humanity. And it's tough and it's hard, and it feels like we can't do it, and yet we will. We always do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now to the mothers,
Yeah.
because you are, you mentioned well-adjusted babies. If you are expecting a child, if you plan to have a child, if you know someone expecting, or you have children, I highly recommend the book. That'll be in the show notes, so you can check it out. It's been a compass through my last, my two twin pregnancies. And so what would you say to the mama bears? Because when they come in my practice, their shoulders are heavy right now. their hearts are heavy right now. And it, what little spark could you offer to the moms that are protecting their cubs right now?
I think, we've touched on that, the driving force of, if you feel like you're compromised in some way this year, to really sit with that, to pause, and to just extend on that for a minute. I think that it's really, really important that we drill home that people don't just, trust me, trust their GP, trust one expert, one book. They have to have the intestinal fortitude to really broadly examine things and be street smart, to just do the research, ask the questions, like we said. And for me, what underpins that is that we can't raise our children twice. And, we tend to think that we're going to have them in our homes for forever and we've got all of this time. But there's a timeline for childhood, and it's really those first sort of 10 years where we are the primary influence on their life. And then they start to have those external influences. And it's really important at that time that we have a great, wholehearted, authentic relationship with them, so that when they're teenagers, they still turn to us for advice. But my point is, in those first 10 years, Devon, even right now when, mums come in and they're feeling like they're struggling and they're, heavy in their hearts, I think that we really undermine mothering. And I know that for me, it's, my boys are the greatest gift I can give to the world. And like you, I'm incredibly career driven and goal driven and all of those things, but I step back and I let my values lead. And I know that if I can surrender, if I have my focus being to be the best that I can be as far as a mum, I know that everything else is going to work itself out in the background when I live by my values. And so for me, I just had patients, older women, as I started having babies, who'd say to me things like that: you can't raise your children twice. And in this day and age, we undermine it. We undervalue the importance of being a mum who's really present. And so I think, sometimes that heaviness comes from women feeling like they're a little bit displaced. Am I doing enough for my children? Am I doing enough to show up in the world and be significant? And all of those things that I just think that noise takes care of itself when our compass is our values. And when our kids are little, I think the greatest gift we can give to humanity is being there with them. And, that doesn't mean that 24 hours a day you do nothing else than sit with your child, but you have it as your focus, that there are periods in your day where they are everything and you're just hanging out with them and you're letting them lead and you're having beautiful conversations. Even still to this day with, our boys who are all teenagers, it's the focus of, come on, we're going to walk the dog. And sometimes they're like, oh, no. But it's dog walks and it's cooking dinner together and it's those things, being in the car and not letting them have their phones on. Simple things where you can make space for great conversations, because like I said, they're not under your influence for forever. And that's really pertinent to me at the moment, because our eldest, is now living in Spain studying chiropractic, and our second leaves in 3 days to go and study and live in Barcelona as well. And you get to this point of thinking, have I done enough? Have I taught them about this or that? And I know that they are so on board with eating well. They know. And of course they do stupid things like kids do, and they drink too much at times and they eat junky food, but they know the value of organic food, and they know they can hold their own in a discussion about drugs and vaccines. And they have a really strong fortitude in and around health. And I know that I can lean on the fact that they have a strong mental health as well, because we've talked about gut health for years. They know the power of the nervous system, all of those things. So, I guess my point for parents and for mama bears is to just pat yourself on the back. You're doing the greatest work there is right now. And with all of this stress that's happening in this year, again, be discerning about how much of your time in your day you let yourself focus on it. And it can't be really that whole woe is me. It has to have strategy behind it, where you might, go and read something but online, but then you look into it further and you find something that inspires you, that keeps you grounded, and you ask for guidance. You and I, we're all about source, and asking source to hook us up with the right people, and you and I know that often the people who regularly get adjusted, who are regularly seeing their chiropractor, know the importance of health comes from within. So they're asking those questions. So, for parents listening, again, if you have an assumption about chiropractic, or if you have an assumption about people, Chinese medicine, or people who don't vaccinate, or whatever it might be, to really let that go and think maybe there are answers somewhere else. And particularly if your child is struggling with a health challenge and you're not getting the results you want.
That's perfect right there. And I love how you've put that, of looking at your assumptions and putting them down and being open to ask different questions and see it differently, because I don't believe that we get out of this, this container that we're in, until we can be compassionate through tough conversations and hearing one another and seeking understanding instead of judgment. So I love that. And for parenting, that is the ultimate freedom. For me, of tapping into their bodies know how to heal, and looking for a support team instead of, an authoritative figure. That changed the game. As we tie up, any closing thoughts, or if they want to connect with you, how do they ask you questions? Where do they find you? What kind of products, how do they stay up to date on what you got coming out?
Yeah, sure. Probably the best way, because, rampant censorship these days, and whether social media pages go down, but probably is the website. So it's welladjustedbabies.co, and we're embarking on doing, regular newsletters and videos there, but there's a whole host of amazing blogs that we've been working on. And great content there, and free resources and things like that. So that's welladjusted.co. And my main social media platforms are still Instagram. So that's Dr. Jen Barham-Floreani. But you'll also find me now on Parler and Telegram, like most of us. Yeah, and so I guess the big thing at the moment, Devon, is I'm recording a 3rd edition of Well Adjusted Babies. So I'm updating everything because of really what I've learned in the last 5 years. And I think it's that perspective that's key. And so it's a holistic guide, really, for all the decisions that you make, preconception, pregnancy, and then through parenting. I also have Ticklish, which is... it's a book that is a gentle conversation starter in and around developmental milestones. So many of our kids are lagging or have, a neurodevelopmental delay these days. And it's a great way to just look at different charts to work out where your child is at. But above and beyond that, it's really has, one tip to a page of things to do with children who are thriving as well. It's just about empowering parents to know what to do, because sometimes, when we switch on a TV and we put our baby in front of that, we switch off their brains. Right. We switch off that synapsing. And so it's filled with a lot of common sense things that we can do with our children that help them thrive.
Reminders of how to play. I love that book. Again, I'm going to have it all in the resources, guys, of where you can stay connected to her. And I don't doubt that I will be inviting her back. And again, just heartfelt gratitude for your time and your leadership, and ... with high hopes, bravely onward. And I'm looking forward to what the future holds.
Thank you. Thank you, darling. And yeah, it's wonderful, so important to have these conversations with parents so that they, know that around the globe there are amazing resources and people who they can lean on, because more than ever we need to, work collectively to preserve our children and have them grow up knowing how amazing they are to transform things as well. So thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. We will get you connected to her. Now, guys, I know you know somebody that you can share this with, so make sure that you share it forward, because we're all in this thing together. So, big hugs across the pond, and I will see you soon. Well, so what'd you think? I told you she is amazing. Now you can see why she has been one of my heroes for over a decade now, and why she blasts my heart wide open when she says, I don't serve anyone when I shut my voice down. She's one of those people that is tapped into that special something within her, and she's devoted to serving her purpose while she's here on planet Earth. I'm so grateful for warriors like her who aren't afraid to brave the wilderness in this 2020, soon to be 2021 adventure that we're in. This is the revolution. This is our time to evolve. This is our time to come together, our time to really look at how powerful we are and how perfectly we have been designed. Dr. Jen is just one of those voices that has been on my heart for years. And now you know her. Now you know where to get the perfect baby shower gift in her book, Well-Adjusted Babies. And I hope her message, I hope her message brought you hope, because I couldn't agree with her more. There is a lack of hope and a lack of trust, and that's an inside game, not an outside game. It starts with you. We want to change the world, we've got to change ourselves. We want to heal the world, we've got to heal ourselves. And Dr. Jen is one of those people that I think is helping humanity do that in big ways. So grateful to her for joining us, and grateful to you for tuning in. If you got any thoughts and questions, drop them into comments, send her a message, send me a message. This is for you. This is for us. This is one of those moments in history where we will look back and see the beauty in the madness, because I believe this is the moment in time when we really, truly come to life. I love you. I'll see you next time.